After returning from a 2-day work trip, something immediately felt wrong. My key refused to turn in the front door lock. The door wasn't jammed, but my porch looked like it had been through a disaster. My native plants were gone, replaced by withering petunias and an eerie cement frog clutching a welcome sign. Even my custom mailbox had been swapped out for a rusty, tin one. At first, I thought maybe I'd arrived at the wrong house. But no, this was definitely Minia, only it seemed hijacked. It turned out that while I was away, the HOA president had decided my yard didn't fit the neighborhood style and took it upon herself to fix it. No heads up, no permission, just a power trip and flip-flops. Have you ever come home and felt like a stranger in your own space? Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I need to know if this kind of craziness is just here in Harbor Heights or if it's everywhere. I'd been living in Harbor Heights for just under 3 months when I first met Brittany Parker. It was a perfect morning, a crisp ocean breeze rolling up from the beach below, sunlight gleaming off the white stucco walls of the hillside homes. I was setting up my new document delivery box next to my front door, a sleek, professional-looking installation that matched the bronze fixtures on my house. As a criminal defense lawyer specializing in digital evidence, I often received sensitive documents that needed secure delivery. The box was discreet, aligned perfectly with the HOA's architectural guidelines, which I'd thoroughly reviewed before installing. That's when I heard the unmistakable slap of flip-flops against pavement. Approaching with purpose. "Excuse me, what exactly do you think you are doing to your Section 8? Came a sharp voice, heavy with forced authority that didn't quite match the speaker's disheveled appearance. I turned to see a woman in her late 20s, dressed in a chaotic mix of designer pieces that somehow looked messy. Her clipboard was plastered with designer stickers, and her phone case glittered with so many rhinestones it looked like a disco ball. "I'm Albert Calloway. I just moved in last month," I said, offering my hand. She glanced at it but didn't shake it. "I'm installing a secure document box, fully compliant with Section 4.3 of the Architectural Guidelines," I added. Her eyes narrowed as she deliberately scribbled something on her clipboard. "I'm Brittany Parker, HOA president of Harbor Heights. That installation disrupts the architectural harmony of the community. You must remove it immediately or face daily fines." She shoved a pre-filled violation notice at me. I noticed the fine was marked at $500, which seemed steep even by California standards. "Actually," I replied calmly, "I've reviewed the guidelines thoroughly. Document boxes under 18 inches in height are explicitly allowed, as long as they match existing fixtures. I'd be happy to show you the relevant section." As a lawyer, I was used to people trying to wield authority they didn't truly have. Brittany's face flushed slightly. "Well, the Architectural Review Committee has final say, and as chair, I'm informing you this installation doesn't meet our standards. You'll receive formal notification within 48 hours. With that, she spun around, flip-flops clicking loudly as she strode to the next house. I finished installing the box, then took detailed photos to document that every measurement was within the guidelines. Deep down, I knew this wouldn't be the last time I'd need solid proof. 2 weeks later, a certified letter arrived. It denied a retroactive application for the document box, an application I never even submitted, and demanded removal within 7 days. I drafted a formal response, citing the exact guidelines, attaching photos proving compliance, and including 3 examples of similar boxes on board members' homes that I'd photographed during morning runs. I hand-delivered the letter to the HOA office and requested it be added to the agenda for the upcoming monthly meeting. That evening, I met my neighbor Martha Donovan, a retired school principal whose garden of native coastal plants was the envy of the block. "I see you've had your first run-in with Brittany," she said, leaning on her fence. "She's got her sights on your privacy hedge next." I overheard her telling the landscaping crew that it's blocking community views even though it's clearly under the height limit. Martha's eyes showed genuine concern. "You might want to attend Thursday's meeting. She tends to go after new homeowners who don't fall in line quickly, especially professionals like you who might challenge her authority." The home meeting was held at the community center overlooking the beach. The room was half full, with most residents wearing that anxious, bored look homeowners get when worried about their property values. Brittany presided at the front table, dressed in what seemed to be an attempt at business attire that somehow combined way too many patterns with excessive rhinestones. When my case was called, I presented my points clearly, showing the guidelines and photographic evidence proving I complied. Brittany interrupted repeatedly, throwing out procedural objections and eventually rushing to call a vote before the discussion was even finished. When she asked for those in favor of requiring removal of the non-compliant installation at the Calloway residence, 4 hands went up, Brittany's and 3 board members who hadn't spoken a single word the entire time. The vote was called. Martha and 2 others raised their hands in opposition. The motion passed. The committee would conduct a further investigation and announce a decision within 60 days. Brittany quickly moved on to the next agenda item. Catching Martha's eye from across the room, she gave me a subtle shake of her head that clearly said, "This is just how it goes." Over the following week, I set up an extensive documentation system throughout my property, hidden cameras disguised as smart home devices, weather sensors, irrigation controllers, and lighting fixtures. As a digital evidence expert, I understood the value of thorough records, and something deep inside me warned that I'd soon need them. That suspicion was confirmed when Martha knocked on my door one morning. "You should know," she said quietly. "Brittany has a history of accidentally damaging non-compliant features during inspections. 3 months ago, Mrs. Henderson's decorative window boxes mysteriously fell off and shattered while the Hendersons were at work." Grateful for the heads-up, I immediately checked my security system to ensure all zones were active. The footage had already recorded Brittany taking photos of my house from multiple angles the day before while I was enjoying coffee on my ocean view deck. Then, the following Saturday, my phone buzzed with security alerts. Brittany was across the street, gesturing toward my property while talking with the HOA's landscaping contractor. Thanks to my directional microphone, I clearly heard her say, "Schedule the emergency landscaping correction for Tuesday around 10 a.m. His car is always gone by 9. As I reviewed the footage, my phone rang. It was the courthouse. "Mr. Calloway, we have an urgent situation with the Westmore case. Key witness documents have gone missing, and we need you in Sacramento immediately for emergency document recovery." My stomach tightened. The Westmore case was a high-profile tech defense involving millions of dollars and my professional reputation. "I'll be there in 4 hours, I said, already packing an overnight bag. Before I could leave, another security alert pinged my phone. Motion detected near my property line. I glanced at the live feed. Brittany was pacing the perimeter of my yard, jotting notes on her ever-present clipboard. I had a feeling that when I returned, there'd be more than just paperwork waiting. The 3-hour drive to Sacramento gave me plenty of time to worry about Brittany's next move. But the Westmore case demanded my full focus. I spent that evening and much of the next day at the courthouse, painstakingly reconstructing evidence chains with the court clerk until we found the missing documents tucked away in a misfiled evidence box. Exhausted but relieved, I prepared to leave when my phone buzzed again. Multiple security alerts from home. Timestamped 10:14 a.m.a. Right around the time Brittany told the landscaper to come. Finding a quiet corner in the courthouse lobby, I opened the security feed. The video showed Brittany arriving with a landscaping crew and Jackson Reynolds, a board member I recognized from the meeting who owned the popular beachfront restaurant. Brittany's voice came through loud and clear. "As you can see, these non-native plants pose a serious environmental threat to the coastal watershed. We're invoking the emergency remediation clause in Section 12 to remove them and replace them with approved species." Jackson looked uneasy. "Shouldn't we notify the homeowner first? The emergency clause applies only to immediate safety hazards," Brittany replied dismissively, laughing lightly. "Jackson, you want your patio permit renewal to go smoothly next month, right? This falls squarely within our authority. Besides, I sent an email notification this morning." Turning to the crew, she ordered, "Remove everything in this front beta including those hideous privacy hedges and replace them with the approved plants we brought." I watched in disbelief as the crew began methodically uprooting the carefully selected native plants I had installed just weeks before. I immediately called Martha, who confirmed the landscaping trucks were parked in front of my house. Next, I sent a formal cease and desist email to the entire board only to receive an automated out-of-office reply from Brittany. My call to the local sheriff was equally unhelpful. The deputy explained that HOAs hold certain maintenance rights and that this would probably be treated as a civil matter unless I could prove malicious intent. Fuming, I watched helplessly as the crew expanded their scope under Brittany's orders, not just removing plants but dismantling the custom irrigation system I'd installed. While we're here, we might as well fix this non-compliant water system, Brittany instructed. Make sure to remove all of it, it's not up to code. One worker accidentally cut the main water line to the house, spraying water across the yard. Shut it off at the street, Brittany commanded, showing zero concern for the damage. We'll report this as an emergency water situation. Jackson finally spoke up. Brittany, this is going too far. His water service, she cut him off cold. This is exactly why we had to act. His non-compliant system was a disaster waiting to happen. She turned directly toward one of my hidden cameras and unaware it was Theory, and added, besides, when people don't follow the rules, they face consequences. From hundreds of miles away, I watched helplessly as my property was systematically vandalized under the guise of emergency maintenance. One of the landscapers spotted a weather sensor mounted on a decorative post near the garden. Hey, what's this thing? He called out. Brittany marched over to inspect. That looks like some kind of camera, she said, her voice suddenly tight with concern. He's spying on the neighborhood. Remove it immediately. The worker pried the device from its housing, damaging the decorative cover but leaving the waterproof internal components intact. Probably the only thing spared from the wrecking crew. That's a recording device he has, Brittany said confidently. Make sure it goes in the trash. What Brittany didn't realize was that my security system was built with redundancy, a lesson I'd learned from years working digital evidence cases, where a single failure could mean losing critical proof. The weather sensor was purposely visible, but 6 other cameras remained perfectly hidden within ordinary landscape features: a decorative rock near the driveway, the porch light fixture, a bird feeder hanging from the oak tree, even the house numbers themselves. Each device ran on its own power source and transmitted footage both to local storage and encrypted cloud backup. I felt a grim satisfaction knowing that every moment of this intrusion was being captured in high definition from multiple angles. On another camera feed, I saw Brittany directing the crew where to plant specific species. The tall ones go here to block his ocean view, she instructed. It'll lower his property value if he tries to sell. Unaware her voice was being perfectly recorded by directional microphones, she continued, make sure to use the most water-intensive plants near the foundation. When his water bill spikes, he'll have another reason to regret crossing me. This level of calculated cruelty went far beyond typical HOA overreach. As I watched, Brittany took photos of the destruction, carefully framing each shot. At one point, she even recorded video, speaking animatedly to the camera with granted gestures toward my property. I couldn't hear her words, but her performative behavior made it clear this wasn't about HOA compliance. It was content for her social media, using my home as a backdrop to craft whatever narrative she wanted for her followers. One landscaper, a young man who seemed increasingly uneasy, approached Jackson. Though their conversation was partially drowned out by the sound of equipment, I caught the worker voicing concern about the scale of the damage and questioning whether they had proper authorization. Jackson looked conflicted, glancing between the worker and Brittany, who was now instructing another crew member to remove a small tree I'd planted in memory of my father last year, a tree fully compliant with landscaping rules and deeply meaningful to me. Little did Brittany know, 6 other cameras captured the entire incident from multiple angles, safely streaming everything to cloud storage. I was about to call my insurance company when another alert arrived. My entire property's water had been shut off at the street using the HOA emergency override key. While technically within their rights during genuine emergencies like flooding, using it for a contrived situation was a blatant abuse of power. Thankfully, my security system's backup power kicked in, ensuring I didn't lose surveillance. As the crew packed up, leaving my front yard a disaster zone, Brittany's voice came through one last time. Let's see how well his fancy sprinklers work now. Maybe he'll finally understand who really controls this neighborhood. A rare feeling hit me, helpless rage mixed with absolute certainty that I was facing someone who needed to be stopped. I spent the rest of the day documenting everything and researching HOA laws while fulfilling my court duties. By the time I started the drive home the next morning, I had the beginnings of a plan. Brittany Parker had just declared war on the wrong attorney. Arriving home early that afternoon, I found my property transformed in the worst way possible. The carefully designed native garden that once graced my yard had been replaced with generic, water-hungry ornamentals, carelessly arranged around a gaudy HOA-approved sign reading Harbor Heights, a premier coastal community. My custom irrigation system, engineered to minimize water use while maximizing plant health, had been completely ripped out and replaced with standard sprinklers already pooling water wastefully on the walkway. Worst of all, the house had no water service at all. Despite my paying premium coastal utility fees, I called an emergency plumber, who arrived within the hour, looking baffled at the scene. "I've never seen anything like this," he said, examining where the HOA crew had damaged the main line. "They didn't just turn off your water, they deliberately cut and capped the pipe in a way that requires professional repair. This wasn't an accident." While waiting for the plumber, as I waited for service to be restored, I reviewed all the documentation and footage from my hidden cameras. The evidence was overwhelming. Brittany and her crew had spent nearly 4 hours on my property, far beyond any reasonable emergency maintenance. The footage showed Brittany directing workers to expand their destruction well past the front landscaping. She made derogatory comments about my profession and taste, used an extended selfie stick to photograph through my office window, called the nursery to order replacement plants at inflated prices, and discussed how to bill me for the so-called emergency remediation services. In one especially chilling clip, Brittany said, "My followers expect a perfect coastal aesthetic. How am I supposed to create content with eyes like his, and modern touches ruining the background? This guy thinks because he's some hotshot lawyer, he can just ignore the rules. But he's about to learn who runs this community." The more I watched, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about enforcing HOA regulations. This was personal for Brittany, a campaign to assert control and wipe out anything that didn't fit her carefully curated vision of Harbor Heights. By the time the plumber finally restored my water service, I had compiled hours of evidence documenting blatant violations of HOA procedures, property damage, invasion of privacy, and potential financial misconduct. Violation notices were taped to my front door, one for the document box by the side gate, even though it was original to the house, another for the deck railing, citing a color variance of less than 10% from the approved shade, and one for an oil spot in the driveway left by a delivery vehicle. The total assessment was $8,900, due within 14 days or lien proceedings would begin. On top of that, a special assessment for emergency landscaping services had been added to my HOA portal, charging me an extra $3,400 for the destruction of my own property. As a criminal defense attorney specializing in digital evidence, I had built my career on meticulously documenting facts and constructing airtight cases. What had happened here wasn't a petty HOA dispute, it was a systematic abuse of power, affecting not just me but potentially many others in the community. Just as I was preparing to call the HOA's management company, Martha appeared at my door, bringing coffee and sympathy. "This isn't the first time," she said, surveying the damage. "Remember Mrs. Simmons' memorial garden for her late husband? Brittany bulldozed it while Mrs. Simmons was out of town, claiming it violated some obscure water restriction policy." Martha introduced me to her daughter Valerie, who had come along. Valerie was an environmental compliance officer for the county, and Martha explained she might have some insights on Brittany's claims about watershed hazards. Valerie examined my ruined garden with professional interest. "This is nonsense," she said. "Your native plants were actually beneficial to the coastal ecosystem. If anything, these new water-hungry ornamentals violate county guidelines for drought-resistant landscaping in coastal zones." She handed me her business card. "I'd be happy to provide an official assessment if you need it." As they were leaving, Martha turned back with one last warning. "Albert, you should know Brittany's been showing pictures to people, photos she took through your office window. She's telling board members it's proof you're running a commercial enterprise from your home, violating residential zoning, My blood ran cold. The case files visible on my desk contained confidential client information related to the Westmore trial, privileged details that could jeopardize both the case and my professional standing if leaked. I thanked Martha and Valerie, then immediately called my senior partner to explain the situation. While on the call, I heard voices from the neighboring yard. Through my security feed, I saw Brittany hosting an impromptu beautification committee meeting, showing before and after photos of my property to several residents. She gestured triumphantly toward my ruined garden, clearly enjoying her display of power. Something hardened inside me, then a cold, professional resolve I usually reserved for my toughest cases. I've prosecuted corporate criminals with higher ethical standards than this woman. I told my partner, it's time to build a case she'll never forget. After ending the call, I sat down at my desk and began crafting the most thorough, methodical response of my career. Brittany Parker had no idea who she was dealing with, but she was about to find out. The HOA president, who lived for social media attention, was about to become the subject of a very different kind of public exposure. And all the designer clothes and rhinestones in the world wouldn't protect her from the consequences of her actions. For the attorney and me, this wasn't just about personal vindication, it was about stopping a pattern of abuse affecting an entire community. The homeowner and I simply wanted justice. The next morning, I began a systematic legal review of Harbor Heights governing documents, applying the same methodical attention I'd bring to a high-stakes criminal defense case. HOA bylaws, covenants, conditions and restrictions, architectural guidelines, and board meeting minutes from the past 2 years were spread out across my dining room table. As I spread the documents across the table, I uncovered multiple procedural violations in Brittany's actions. The emergency remediation clause she cited required documented environmental hazards and a 7-day notice except in cases of immediate safety threats. Her authority to shut off water was explicitly limited to actual leaks or flood risks. Most damning of all, the HOA's own privacy policy strictly forbade photographing private property interiors, a rule Brittany had blatantly ignored when she snapped photos through my office window. I compiled a detailed legal brief, organizing time-stamped footage chronologically and by violation type. The financial irregularities were especially troubling. The nursery supplying the replacement plants was owned by Brittany's cousin, with invoices inflated by 200% over market prices. Similar patterns appeared in past emergency landscaping jobs, always the same vendor, always charging premium rates, and always targeting new homeowners or those who had challenged Brittany's authority. Martha invited me to a morning coffee gathering with several other Harbor Heights residents who'd faced similar treatment. The Hendersons, a young couple with 2 small children, had been billed over $4,000 for unauthorized window boxes that had existed long before Brittany became president. Dr. Simmons, a retired marine biologist, showed me documentation of fines imposed on her for installing solar panels, despite California state law explicitly protecting homeowners' rights to renewable energy installations. The Washington family had been threatened with daily fines simply because their children's beach toys were visible from the street. Every case followed the same pattern: arbitrary enforcement, excessive fines, and escalating retaliation whenever a homeowner questioned Brittany's authority. We formed an informal coalition to share documentation of selective enforcement and strategize next steps. Valerie offered invaluable insights on actual coastal environmental regulations, confirming that my landscaping was fully compliant and that Brittany's watershed hazard claims were entirely fabricated. If anything, Valerie pointed out, the HOA's approved landscaping practices violated several county water conservation ordinances. "I'm surprised no one has reported them before," she said. The pieces were falling into place when my phone chimed with an email notification, a certified letter announcing an emergency home meeting scheduled for the next morning to discuss my dangerous, non-compliant water systems and unsanctioned recording devices. I'd expected escalation, but not this swiftly. Minutes later, a second email arrived. An anonymous formal complaint had been filed with the state bar, accusing me of using legal intimidation against volunteer board members and operating a commercial enterprise from my home. The timing made the source obvious. Brittany was targeting my professional reputation. It was a dangerous gamble, revealing either boldness or ignorance of how the legal system works. That afternoon, Jackson Reynolds contacted me privately. His restaurant's caller ID appeared on my phone. "Look, I'm not supposed to be talking to you," he said nervously, "but this has gone too far. Brittany's been using HOA funds for personal expenses, calling them community improvements that somehow always benefit properties near hers or owned by her friends. I've questioned the accounting twice, and both times she threatened to complicate my business permit." Jackson's information confirmed my suspicions about financial misconduct, adding a new layer to the case I was building. I thanked him for coming forward and assured him his identity would remain confidential. Later that day, a county inspector arrived at my property in response to an anonymous complaint about illegal water diversion. After inspecting the irrigation system installed by Brittany's crew, the inspector looked puzzled. "This setup violates county code in 3 different ways," he explained. "The runoff alone could trigger fines under our conservation ordinances." He showed me a clipboard filled with similar complaints filed against home-mandated modifications throughout Harbor Heights. "Someone's been reporting these issues for months, but until now we didn't have clear proof of who was responsible for these non-compliant installations." I handed over copies of my security footage showing Brittany directing the installation, which the inspector gratefully added to his case file. "This is exactly what we needed. We'll have a formal report ready by tomorrow morning." The evening before the emergency meeting, I finalized my presentation, assembling all the evidence into a comprehensive document with clear timestamps and citations of relevant regulations. Just as I finished, my phone buzzed with a security alert. The live feed showed Brittany and the landscaper on my property at dawn, frantically trying to fix the irrigation system before the county's follow-up inspection. I watched closely a broken bar with coffee in hand. Brittany and the landscaper worked frantically, replacing parts of the irrigation system they'd installed just days before. I calmly logged the time and activity as evidence of tampering with the system right before a regulatory inspection at 6:15 a.m. Their rushed repairs only served to incriminate them further, each fix an admission that the original installation was faulty. As I prepared for the meeting, I realized this wasn't just a simple HOA dispute anymore. This was about accountability and making sure that positions of authority, no matter how small, weren't exploited for personal gain or petty power plays. Brittany Parker had orchestrated this mess through a clear pattern of deliberate misconduct. Now, she would have to face the consequences, documented in high definition from multiple angles. The Harbor Heights Community Center was unusually crowded for 8:30 a.m. News of the upcoming confrontation had spread rapidly through neighborhood text chains and morning dog walking groups, filling the room to standing room only with curious residents. Sunlight poured through large windows overlooking the Pacific, creating an oddly peaceful backdrop for the showdown about to unfold. Brittany arrived 10 minutes late, making a theatrical entrance in what appeared to be her version of professional attire, a blindingly bright floral dress, oversized sunglasses, and loud plastic jewelry that clacked as she moved. She seemed briefly taken aback by the crowd but quickly recovered, flashing a practiced social media smile as she took her seat at the front table. "I thank you all for attending this emergency session," she began, her voice carrying the forced enthusiasm of someone used to recording videos for followers online. "We are here to address urgent compliance issues involving the Callaway residents that affect our community's safety and property values." For the next 15 minutes, Brittany presented her case against me. She displayed selectively edited photos of my property, accusing my document delivery box of violating architectural harmony, claiming my landscaping endangered environmental health, and alleging my surveillance equipment targeted neighbors, all tied to her content creation. Her most serious charge was that I was running a commercial law practice from my home, supposedly proven by photos she took of my case files through my window. "Harbor Heights is a residential community," she declared with rehearsed indignation. "We cannot allow commercial enterprises to devalue our properties or change the neighborhood's character." Throughout her presentation, Brittany repeatedly interrupted herself to call for procedural votes from the board members, attempting to limit discussion time and impose rules clearly meant to prevent me from mounting a full response. When she finally acknowledged my right to speak, Her confident smile suggested she saw it as a mere formality before the board rubber-stamped her agenda. "Mr. Calloway, you have 3 minutes to address the board's concerns." I approached the podium calmly, carrying only a single folder. "Point of order," I began. "According to HOA Bylaw 7.3, any homeowner facing potential fines has the right to a full hearing with equal time for response. Is the board attempting to modify that right in today's proceedings?" The room fell silent. One board member leaned over to whisper to Brittany, whose expression flickered briefly. "We're simply trying to manage time efficiently," she replied. An older resident stood from the audience. "I move that we follow the established bylaws and allow equal time." Several others quickly seconded the motion. Brittany had no choice but to concede. "Fine, proceed with your response, Mr. Calloway." For the next 20 minutes, I delivered a thorough, methodical analysis that exposed every aspect of Brittany's misconduct. I presented HOA governing documents with highlighted sections showing the board's violations, side-by-side comparison photos of identical features on board members' properties that hadn't been cited, environmental compliance documents from the county, evidence linking the nursery to Brittany's cousin along with inflated pricing, and a professional assessment of landscaping replacement costs. With each point, I cited specific rules, timestamps, and documentation. The room grew tense as residents began to grasp the scope of deception. Brittany interrupted repeatedly, calling points of order and raising procedural objections that grew increasingly desperate as her narrative unraveled. When I presented evidence of selective enforcement showing how similar violations were ignored on properties owned by Brittany's friends and fellow board members, some murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jackson Reynolds, who had remained silent until then, suddenly spoke up. "I can confirm that proper procedures have not been followed in many enforcement actions. As treasurer, I've questioned several undocumented financial decisions." Brittany turned to him, eyes wide with shock and betrayal. "Jackson, this is hardly the appropriate forum." "It is exactly the appropriate forum. The membership deserves transparency," he interrupted firmly. The atmosphere shifted palpably as homeowners began asking pointed financial questions. How were vendors selected? Why were certain properties targeted while others with identical features were ignored? Who authorized emergency actions without full board approval? Brittany's answers became increasingly flustered and contradictory. When pressed about the nursery connection, she feigned ignorance despite emails showing she specifically requested plants from her cousin's business. When questioned about photographing through my window, she insisted the view was from a public area, despite clear evidence that Brittany had used an extended selfie stick from my private yard to take photos. She insisted she was only capturing views from public property. As her position weakened, Brittany made a desperate power play. "These accusations are baseless attempts to distract from the real issues," she declared. "The board has emergency authority to address non-compliance. I move that we immediately approve a special assessment against the Calloway property for intentional landscape destruction, water system tampering, and legal costs." Without allowing any further discussion, she quickly called for a vote. 3 hands went up, Brittany's and 2 board members, both visibly uncomfortable. "Motion carries," she announced hastily. "Assessment approved with expedited collection." I remained calm, holding up a single sheet of paper that had just arrived via text. "Before this vote is recorded, I'd like to enter into the record this morning's county inspection report, received just 30 minutes ago. I believe the environmental compliance officer who signed it is actually present today." Heads turned to the door, where Valerie stood quietly in her official county uniform. Brittany's face drained of color as she realized the trap had closed. The emergency meeting she had called to consolidate her power had instead become the stage for her public reckoning. Valerie stepped forward, her county badge clearly visible. "Good morning, I'm Valerie Winters, Environmental Compliance Officer for the county. Our office has received multiple complaints about non-compliant landscaping modifications within Harbor Heights." Brittany immediately tried to adjourn the meeting, but Valerie politely continued, "Since this matter is already being discussed, I think it's beneficial for everyone to hear the regulatory findings today, rather than waiting for a separate community notification." She explained that their investigation documented numerous violations of coastal protection ordinances resulting from home-mandated landscaping changes implemented without proper permits or environmental impact assessments. The most recent case at the Callaway residence is particularly concerning, Valerie noted. Native species beneficial to the coastal ecosystem were removed and replaced with non-native ornamentals, which also violate county water conservation requirements. Brittany attempted to interrupt, but Valerie calmly raised her hand. The county will be issuing formal notices requiring remediation. I should also mention that we had documentation showing these actions occurred despite the homeowner having fully compliant landscaping prior to HOA intervention. With Valerie's official findings backing me, I continued my presentation with greater force. I displayed split-screen video showing Brittany directing the removal of native plants alongside county regulations clearly encouraging their preservation in coastal zones. I presented financial analyses exposing inflated service billing to certain homeowners, while board members received discounted rates from the same vendors. Statistical data showed selective enforcement targeting new homeowners who didn't fit Brittany's aesthetic vision and particularly professionals likely to challenge her authority. Former residents shared stories of property modifications or even moving away due to harassment thinly disguised as rule enforcement. The most damning evidence came last. Footage of Brittany using a selfie stick to photograph confidential case files through my office window, a blatant invasion of privacy and potential breach of attorney-client privilege. The room was utterly silent as stunned residents watched the carefully crafted facade of HOA propriety collapse before their eyes. Jackson Reynolds, visibly disturbed by the revelations, publicly distanced himself from the board's actions. As treasurer, I was not made aware of many of these decisions, he said. I formally move that the Community Commission an independent financial audit by a neutral third party. Multiple residents immediately seconded the motion. Valerie outlined the regulatory consequences facing the HOA, explaining the county could impose fines for improper plant removal and require remediation to restore native species. Most concerning to the board members was her explanation of personal liability. Those who authorize these non-compliant modifications could face individual penalties if found to have knowingly violated environmental regulations. I presented a formal letter demanding the immediate removal of all fines and special assessments against my property, a written retraction of all violations, reimbursement for landscaping and plumbing repairs, and Brittany's resignation from the board. Cornered but still fighting, Brittany dismissed the evidence as elaborate intimidation from someone who knows legal loopholes. Turning to the residents with her practiced. With an air of indignation, Brittany fired back, "This is exactly why we need strong enforcement. People like Mr. Callaway think they can use their professional skills to bully volunteer board members who are just trying to maintain our community standards." Her attempt to reclaim the moral high ground might have played well in an online video, but facing overwhelming evidence and growing community anger, it fell completely flat. I then revealed the morning's footage showing Brittany rushing to fix violations just before the county inspection. The residents' reaction was immediate and visceral. A visible disgust spread through the room. Calls for emergency board elections and a full financial audit grew louder. Brittany, realizing she was losing control, made a last-ditch effort to redirect the focus. "If Mr. Callaway is such a stickler for rules and privacy," she said, "perhaps he should explain why confidential client materials were clearly visible through his windows. I have photographic evidence raising serious ethical questions about his handling of case information." The room fell into a stunned silence at this direct attack on my professional integrity. Brittany smiled triumphantly, convinced she'd finally found leverage. Instead, she had walked straight into my final trap. "Thank you, Miss Parker," I replied with perfect courtroom calm, "for publicly admitting to intentionally surveilling confidential, attorney-client privileged materials." To be clear, for everyone here, photographing confidential legal documents is not just an HOA violation but could also be a criminal invasion of privacy and interference with privileged communications. I appreciate your confidence. It will be particularly relevant to my firm's ethics counsel and potentially the district attorney's office. Brittany's smile froze in horror as the reality of her mistake sank in. Valerie stepped forward again to continue presenting the county's official findings, but the meeting had already erupted. Homeowners were demanding immediate financial transparency and the removal of the entire board. The HOA president, who had ruled through intimidation and procedural manipulation, had finally overplayed her hand, bringing about her own downfall through the very public exposure she had always craved, just not in the way she had imagined. As the meeting descended into chaotic motions and calls from all sides, I quietly gathered my materials. The case had been made, the evidence was irrefutable, and the community itself was now demanding accountability. Sometimes, the most satisfying legal victories aren't won with dramatic courtroom speeches, but by simply ensuring all the facts are out in the open and then letting justice take its course. Brittany Parker was about to learn that lesson the hard way. 2 weeks later, I hosted a morning coffee gathering on my newly restored deck overlooking the Pacific. Martha brought her famous blueberry muffins, Valerie provided updates on the county's regulatory progress, and Jackson, who had resigned from the board the day after the emergency meeting, explained how Brittany had manipulated HOA procedures for years. The morning sun cast a golden glow across the water as we talked about the remarkable changes sweeping through Harbor Heights. The independent audit is uncovering financial irregularities going back at least 18 months, Jackson explained, relief clear in his voice. Brittany controlled everything through procedural tricks, scheduling crucial votes when opposition members were absent, creating subcommittees with special powers, using emergency provisions to bypass normal approval channels, and tightly controlling information flow. Most of us only saw what she wanted us to see. Valerie nodded. The county has assessed fines for environmental violations, but they're being directed personally at Brittany rather than the HOA. We had documentation showing she knowingly acted against board policies and county regulations. The HOA insurance company had refused to cover Brittany's actions, labeling them intentional misconduct rather than good faith errors. An emergency board election was scheduled for the following month. Martha was nominated to run for president by a committee of longtime residents. I never wanted to get involved in HOA politics, she admitted, but after seeing how easily the system can be abused, I realized staying on the sidelines just enables the power-hungry. Martha was helping establish a new architectural guidelines focused on clear, objective compliance standards, transparent approval processes, neutral appeals, and actual environmental protection and not arbitrary aesthetics. The community had begun a healing process, symbolized by a morning beach cleanup event that drew over 40 residents had gathered for a basic legal education workshop I'd organized as a goodwill gesture, helping homeowners understand their rights and the proper procedures for HOA governance. Knowledge is the best protection against abuse of power, I told the group on my deck. When everyone understands the rules and their rights, it becomes much harder for anyone to manipulate the system. Brittany's situation resolved in ways both expected and surprising. Her social media content had shifted dramatically, now focusing on her recovery from HOA trauma and standing up to community bullies, a narrative conveniently leaving out her role as the main source of that trauma. Her property was listed for sale, with listing photos carefully staged to hide the view of my restored native garden next door. The state bar not only dismissed her complaint against me but also opened an ethics inquiry into her privacy breach after reviewing my evidence. Most notably, former victims of her selective enforcement began sharing their stories publicly during county hearings investigating HOA practices across the region, potentially paving the way for stronger oversight regulations. The irony, Martha observed, was that Brittany could have actually done some good for Harbor Heights if she'd channeled her energy into genuine community improvement instead of control and image management. She had the drive and organizational skills, Martha said, just the wrong priorities. Jackson agreed. Everything was about appearance, not substance. The perfect metaphor is right there in her wardrobe, a designer labels thrown together without harmony or function, just like her policies. 6 months later, Harbor Heights had transformed remarkably. The neighborhood hosted a Sunset Beach gathering with the newly elected board, including longtime residents from diverse professional backgrounds. Martha, as the new president, presented plans for a restored native plant garden at the neighborhood entrance, designed with input from local environmental experts, including Valerie. The HOA now operated with unprecedented transparency, all financial decisions documented and accessible to members, with a clear appeals process for architectural decisions. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting orange and pink reflections across the waves, my phone buzzed with a security alert. The screen showed Brittany slowly driving through the neighborhood, photographing homes for what her social media now called her toxic HOA recovery journey. I simply smiled, put my phone away, and raised my glass in a toast to the neighbors who had become friends. "The most valuable protection isn't just documentation and evidence," I said, looking around the community we'd rebuilt. "It's creating a community where transparency and fairness are the foundation." After I finished speaking, I noticed Valerie excuse herself to take a call and head toward her county vehicle parked nearby. From the corner of my eye, I saw her approach Brittany's car, clipboard in hand, responding to multiple reports of harassment violating the restraining order the HOA had eventually been forced to seek. Some people never stop performing for an audience that doesn't exist, but fortunately, the rest of us prefer living in reality. Harbor Heights had learned a valuable lesson. The system works when people participate, when they question authority responsibly, and when they remember that community guidelines exist to improve everyone's living experience and not to serve personal agendas. As a criminal defense attorney, I'd built my career protecting rights within complex systems. I never expected to apply those skills to an HOA dispute, but the principles were the same. You document everything, know the rules better than those trying to misuse them, build coalitions with others facing injustice, and present evidence methodically until the truth becomes undeniable. Sometimes justice arrives in dramatic confrontations, but more often, it comes through persistent documentation and the courage of community members standing together against abuse, no matter how small the stage. This story may be over, but at HOA Stories, we have a whole vault of mayhem waiting. Choose your next rabbit hole wisely.